This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. As the nation celebrates Thanksgiving, Professor Robert Paarlberg summarizes the politics of food in a country where obesity may be more of a problem than hunger. This year, Thanksgiving coincides with Hanukkah, and the role of God and religion in our civic life is the subject of a provocative interview with Sean Faircloth, a former legislator from Maine and an advocate of strict separation of church and state. And Bill Press talks with California Congressman Sam Farr. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. Follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Robert Paarlberg is an expert on food. In addition to summarizing the science and politics of food production, he notes that the biggest health threat from American agriculture is not on the farm or in the labs of Monsanto, but in our own kitchens. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Robert Paarlberg is a political science professor at Wellesley College and adjunct professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. A leading authority on food policy, he has just published the second edition of the book, Food Politics, What Everyone Needs to Know. Robert Paarlberg, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. You know, your book is organized as a series of questions and answers about how food is grown, distributed, and consumed. Is it possible to sum up for the listeners what everyone needs to know about the politics of food?
No, it isn't. But I can give you. I can
How about a condensed version?
I can give you a large framework in which to approach that that level of understanding. We need to understand that there is no single global food system. In tropical Africa and South Asia, for example, the biggest problem remains undernutrition. Governments that are not doing enough to boost the productivity and income of smallholder farmers, where 1 out of 3 is chronically hungry, while in rich countries like the United States, the biggest diet-related problem today is overnutrition among both rich and poor citizens. More than 1 out of 3 Americans today is clinically obese. So some countries consume too little food, others consume too much. There's no one size that fits all.
There seems to be a worldwide antagonism toward companies like Monsanto that produce genetically modified food and pesticides in the name of yielding bigger, better crops. What's wrong with using science to feed more hungry people on the planet? What are the real trade-offs there?
Well, agricultural science has lifted constraints on human population growth. 200 years ago, the world had about 1 billion people, and many had a very poor diet. Today we have 7 billion, and most enjoy vastly improved diets, and all this would have been impossible without agricultural science. Agricultural science allows us now to produce 10 times as much food on the same acre of land as 200 years ago. But, the trade-offs are real. With high-yield farming, we're trading one kind of environmental risk, mostly deforestation and soil erosion from the expansion of low-yield agriculture. With high-yield farming, we buy into another kind of risk, usually linked to chemical runoff and water pollution.
Now, has our food been genetically modified for quite some time without issue? I mean, corn you buy in the grocery store, for instance, has been hybridized for quite some time, has it not?
Yeah, absolutely, and for about 10,000 years. Except for just a few wild foods like fish or like the native blueberries that I enjoy in Maine every summer, just about all of our food products have been modified. They're domesticated species. They're not natural species. They've been modified over the years by selective breeding. They're a little bit like show dogs or racehorses or decorative flowers. We have changed nature to suit our needs and preferences. But now we've gone beyond selective breeding to genetic engineering, We've been doing that for about 20 years. Some critics say it's a step too far, and it's really only with genetic engineering that the issue of genetic modification became highly politicized.
We're speaking with Robert Paarlberg, political science professor at Wellesley College and adjunct professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, and we're discussing the second edition of the book, Food Politics, What Everyone Needs to Know. What is your opinion of the move to require labeling of genetically modified food?
Well, in the United States, it's not required yet, but there is a significant social movement pushing for mandatory labeling, and I see this as part of a larger effort by some activist groups to not simply to inform consumers or give them an informed choice, but actually to further marginalize the position of GMO foods in the market. And it might work. In Europe, where they do have mandatory labeling, you can't find any foods in the market that contain GMOs. So the choice may be either mandatory labels and no GMOs, or no mandatory labels and some GMOs. But my major concern here is that I do a lot of my work in Africa and the developing world, and my concern is that mandatory labeling in the United States might place an added stigma on GMOs in developing countries, and those countries may need some of the productivity gains that only GMOs can bring, like food crops that can resist pest damage without chemical sprays. So if the United States joins Europe in rejecting GMO foods, it's going to be harder for poor countries to make use of the valuable technical options that may be provided only through genetic engineering in the years ahead.
I'm wondering how long-term negative an effect it would be to have labeling of genetically modified food. I mean, there are probably plenty of people that don't care one way or the other. Are they a small percentage of people, and so therefore it would hurt the production of genetically modified food if they're labeled?
Food companies don't want to lose any sales at all.
Yeah.
And if they know that GMO foods are being demonized and heavily criticized by activist groups, they'd rather not run any risk of losing sales, and so they will reformulate their products if necessary to get rid of the genetically modified ingredients so they won't have to put a GMO label on it. Currently in the United States, we've practically driven most GMO products out of the direct human food supply already because the product has been stigmatized. We don't have any GMO wheat on the market. We don't have any GMO rice. We don't have any GMO potatoes, although we used to, but they were withdrawn. We don't have any GMO fruits and vegetables to speak of, except some papaya and some summer squash and sweet corn. We don't have any GMO animals. Already, GMOs have been so stigmatized that they really don't play a large role in our food supply. All we have in food products today are derivatives of GMO soybeans and wheat. GMO soybeans and corn and sugar beets, so some starches and some oils and some sweeteners. And companies might simply remove those and go to non-GMO sources for oils and sweeteners and starches and not have any GMO label at all. That's what food companies in Europe have done.
Now, many people are critical of agribusiness and have a romanticized ideal of the family farm, but doesn't food raised on small farms cost more and run the risk of contamination?
Well, it does cost more per bushel of production. I mean, this is the way we produced food 100 years ago on small diversified farms, so it's not surprising that if we went back to that model today, we'd see production costs go up compared to today's larger, more specialized farms. Today's large, highly capitalized farms also produce food that's safer from microbial contamination compared to food 100 years ago. But small farms today are also producing food that's just as safe. Food is generally, when food leaves the farm today in the United States, it's generally very safe, whether it's leaving a large farm or a small farm. Most of today's much reduced food contamination risks are introduced not through the way food is produced on the farm, but instead by the the careless way it's handled and prepared actually in the home.
So mixing your uncooked meats with the cooked meats and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Don't bring the cooked meat back from the grill on the same platter that the uncooked meat was
right.
sitting on.
Yeah, right. I spent a few years in the restaurant business, so that one's always been ingrained in my head. So
that's the rookie mistake that everybody makes.
Yeah. Now, I think most people understand that gigantic agricultural firms have a profit motive, of course. What's the real agenda behind the populist themes of food activists? And are there hidden agendas? I mean, you started to touch on it a little bit, but so if we really don't have that many GMOs, what's everybody getting up in arms about? Is it just because there are no labels? There's no requirement? Is there something else there?
Well, it's not just the GMO issue, of course. And here, I like to draw a distinction between food companies that supply products to consumers, including unhealthy snack foods and caloric sodas that don't have any food value at all, versus agribusiness companies that are supplying the seeds, the chemicals, and the machineries to farmers. I think there are plenty of legitimate populist reasons to criticize food companies for the products that they sell and the products that they advertise to children. But the companies that supply things to farmers, here I don't think the criticism is quite as justified. The farmers themselves have valued the added productivity and the profit that they make from the machinery, the chemicals, and the seeds. The farmers themselves seldom complain. Most of those who complain about these companies, including biotech companies like Monsanto, are not the farmers that are buying their products, but instead groups that are opposed in principle to applications of some kinds of modern science to agriculture, or maybe wanting to hold on to an earlier, more diversified model of farming.
We're speaking with Robert Paarlberg, political science professor at Wellesley College and adjunct professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, discussing the just-published second edition of the book, Food Politics, What Everyone Needs to Know. Before we let you go, what is the role of climate change on agriculture, and how does food growing affect climate change?
Agriculture affects climate change by emitting greenhouse gases through land use changes when deforestation occurs, or the digestive gases that are emitted from ruminant animals like cows. There are agricultural contributions to climate change. I'm more worried about what climate change is going to do to agriculture, particularly in developing countries. The impacts will depend upon where you are. In North America, actually, climate change is likely to bring longer growing seasons, more carbon fertilization of plants, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has calculated that crop yields in North America are actually going to increase by 5 to 20% during the first several decades of this century. But in tropical countries, it's going to be a very different story. There, due to climate change, rice and wheat production is expected now to be 14% to 34% lower in the year 2050 compared to a world without climate change. So in those countries, there are going to be water shortages. Heat in the growing season is going to reach the threshold that the crops will tolerate. There will be yield losses due to heat and diminished water. So the rich countries created the problem, but the poor countries are going to be paying the biggest price when it comes to the agricultural sector.
Often seems to be the case. Robert Paarlberg, political science professor at Wellesley College, adjunct professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, here discussing with us today the second edition of the book, Food Politics, What Everyone Needs to Know. Professor, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back and talking with you again soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. The Founding Fathers professed no particular religious belief, says Sean Faircloth, an activist organizing around the issue of separating church and state, a cause that he says has the support of Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and George Clooney. And we'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
As we approach our annual feast of Thanksgiving, please join me in expressing our nation's deepest, heartfelt feelings for an extra special group of America's farmers. That raspberry goes out to the 50 billionaires who've been farming the U.S. Farm Subsidy program for years, harvesting a cornucopia of taxpayer cash for themselves or their corporate empires. The diligent watchdogs of the Environmental Working Group match their own farm subsidy database with the Forbes 400 list of richest Americans to unmask these Gucci-wearing old McDonald's. E-I-E-I-O, what a ripoff! Among the richest of these faux farmers are 3 Walmart heirs whose personal wealth totals $100 billion. Then there's investment huckster Charles Schwab, sitting on a $5 billion wad of wealth, yet pumping $500,000 worth of rice subsidies into his California duck hunting resort. Also, corporate takeover artist Henry Kravis, who has amassed some $5 billion in wealth, took more than $1 million from us to subsidize safflower, sunflower, and other crops raised on 2 of his ranches. Especially jarring is the presence of such multi-billionaire right-wingers as oil and entertainment tycoon Philip Anschutz and nuclear waste mogul Harold Simmons. They've expressed disdain for government spending on poor people and other, quote, takers, yet they've gladly taken more than $500,000 each in farm payments. Actually, the working group's tally understates the total haul by these mega-rich tillers of our public treasury. Many also harvest crop insurance subsidies, but Congress has dutifully outlawed disclosure of these names to the public, even though it's our money they receive. This is Jim Hightower saying, in fact, these billionaires' most profitable ag products are the Congress critters they keep in their corrals.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Church and state expert Sean Faircloth, he wants to separate them, reminds us on Thanksgiving that despite the prayers we might offer privately, the only reference to religion in the Constitution is its exclusion. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Sean Faircloth is former director of strategy and policy for the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, which is an advocate of separation of church and state. A former member of the Maine state legislature, Mr. Faircloth is the author of a book called Attack of the Theocrats, How the Religious Right Harms Us All and What We Can Do About It. Sean Faircloth, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Great to be with you.
What did you learn as a state legislator about church and state relations?
Well, the first lesson, I think Woody Allen one time said a big part of success, or 90% of success, is showing up. During my 10 years of service, I served 6 years on the Judiciary Committee. I served a term on the Appropriations Committee, which is the most powerful committee. And then I was elected majority whip by my Democratic colleagues. And so I was always in positions where I was to be lobbied. And one group that I give credit to that lobbied was the religious right. And even though I was tucked up in the Northeast there, they still had an organized group with a steady, visible presence in our state legislature. I cannot say the same for people who advocated for a secular perspective on public policy issues. And I think that, unfortunately, is true, but even more so in the South and the Midwest and the West to some degree. And thus, we unfortunately live in the kind of society we do today where really, let's face it, as I document in my book, theocracy is on the rise. I wouldn't say America is a theocracy yet, but there are a lot of elected officials who advocate theocratic viewpoints, and I write a whole chapter in my book naming several of them.
Do you find it ironic that the Tea Party, which traces its philosophical roots to the Founding Fathers, don't understand that Franklin, Madison, Jefferson, and others were strongly opposed to the mixing of religion and government?
Yes, I write a chapter in my book as sort of an easy toolkit, if you will. Each chapter offers a concise way of looking at different portions of this issue, and one is about the history of our founding. And I submit that if a Jefferson, Madison, and I even demonstrate this through Abraham Lincoln as well, that several of our most revered early leaders would probably have trouble getting elected to Congress, much less to the presidency of the United States, because of the healthy skepticism that they expressed regarding religion itself and definitely about religion involving government. And they, of course, made it a mission, particularly Jefferson and Madison, made it a life's mission to separate church from state.
We're speaking with Sean Faircloth, and he's the author of the book called Attack of the Theocrats, How the Religious Right Harms Us All and What We Can Do About It. Wasn't the Declaration of Independence, which mentions the Creator, a compromise between free-thinking Enlightenment values and belief in a God who created life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
Right. The way I look at the Declaration of Independence is that if you were in that era, this is a time before Darwin, mind you, that those who were deists, such as Jefferson, who was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, deist was as far to the secular side of the dial as you could possibly get in that time frame. And he expressed extreme skepticism about Christianity, expressed that he didn't necessarily himself believe in the divinity of Christ or didn't even believe in miracles. He took a knife, literally took a knife to the Bible, cut out everything that had to do with miracles and all of that, and left it a much smaller document having to do with the positive and compassionate statements and parables from Jesus and so forth, dramatically diminished from what the Bible is in its original form. He would be attacked were he to engage in such knife cutting today. But yet he is really, with Madison, the founding intellectual, and with Madison, who's the father of the Constitution, that's where you not only do you not find references to God in the Constitution, our true founding document, but also the only references to religion are to its exclusion. That is, that there shall be no religious test for public office and no establishment of religion. So the religious right manages to gloss over these essential points.
And yeah, I was going to say, and yet we see more religious reference nowadays than probably any time in history. You say that secular Americans must argue their case, but in a way that connects with the hearts of our fellow Americans. How do you do that?
Well, in my book, I lay out a 10-point vision of a secular America. Unfortunately, the 10-point vision is designed to redress 10 injustices. And a lot of your listeners may say, geez, it sure would be bad if, a Rick Perry or a Michelle Bachmann or someone along those lines were ever to be president or something like that. That would be true. That would be bad. But what I want people to be aware of is that in large measure, it already happened. I go through 10 areas of law, children's law. I go through areas of employment discrimination. So a lot of times your listeners are probably familiar with two areas. Most people are aware of the two big ones, if you will, women's reproductive issues and discrimination against gay people. Very important. And clearly with a primary motivation in opposition to what I think is the enlightened viewpoint is a religious opposition. But what I do is lay out 8 more areas of law where there's religious bias. And I particularly emphasize the area of children's law as one of those 10 because there's such a multiplicity of laws where religion is used as a justification, not for some attitude. That would be bad enough, or not for some bias interpersonally. No, I'm talking about laws that provide for religious bias, and that these are the types of things when your listeners talk to their neighbors, you can say, really, you think religious child care should be exempted from health and safety laws? I think most of our neighbors, including religious neighbors, will say, well, no, of course not. And most people just aren't aware that these statutes are on the books in many states.
You quote George W. Bush as saying God wanted him to be president. Did he mean that? I mean, does it mean that God tilted the results of the Florida election? And what do you think Bush supposed God had in mind for Dick Cheney?
Right. Well, when Bush said to the president of Iraq, the president of France, that his Iraq policy was guided by the Bible, I don't know if Bush was sincere, hypocritical. It's not really for me to say. The distinction between a hypocrite and a fanatic is not really one I delve into much. All I know is the result when that person is a politician is largely the same, and it goes against the values of people quite recently. Jack Kennedy and Barry Goldwater, two guys on the opposite side of the political spectrum back in the 60s. But Barry Goldwater said, quote, I have no respect for the religious right. And Jack Kennedy said, I believe in America where the separation of church and state is, quote, absolute. That's what Jack Kennedy said, absolute. So unfortunately, during the lifetime of many of your listeners, or some of your older listeners can remember back to those days, but things have changed so dramatically. But I think because it's been with religious right dominance so much of the last 20, 30 years, that people accept it as somehow always having been, and that's just not true.
We're speaking with Sean Faircloth, former Director of Strategy and Policy for the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. And, before we go on, Sean, let me ask you, I'm introducing you here as the former Director of Strategy and Policy for the Dawkins Foundation. What are you doing now?
Richard Dawkins is helping out with a new 501c3 that I'm starting that really is, his foundation is Reason and Science. My focus is about political organizing and political strategy. So I'm creating a secular strategy 501c3. It's not to endorse candidates per se. What we'd be engaging in is issue messaging. So we're going to get out there and organize people, a formal organized campaign that includes both religious people. There are a lot of good religious people who care about separation of church and state, of course. And then there are non-religious people, the Warren Buffetts, the Bill Gates, the George Clooneys, the Brad Pitts, all of whom are not religious, all of whom are greatly admired. Those people, those four named celebrities that I've mentioned, are greatly admired, and they represent millions upon millions of non-religious Americans who have not heretofore organized with our liberal religious friends to really get religion out of government. So I'm going to organize that campaign with a real focus toward the 2016 election, saying it's time now. We've had enough of this religious right mania. 20 to 30 years of it is enough. We need to get back to the values of our nation's founders.
Part of your plan to return America to the secularism of our founding fathers?
Exactly, and not just the abstract. I think, frankly, a lot of the, the intellectuals, these atheist intellectuals and everyone, they kind of want to talk in abstractions. Well, I'm a 10-year politician, and I've seen what the religious right can do, and a lot of it, to their credit, they did because they organized, and we need to do the same. And so I'm very eager to work with liberal ministers and rabbis and, imams, whoever, along with non-religious people, and build what is the true majority of the American population, because the true majority of the American population says, listen, you've got your right to privacy. Listen, I don't want religious people telling me what to do and using the government to tell me to do it. And we need that majority view to hold sway. Barack Obama won that election, but as I document in my book, unfortunately, in the U.S. House and in most state legislatures, the religious right power is dramatically influential.
Okay. Now, if folks wanted to find out more about your latest venture, can they contact you?
Absolutely. We are starting this up now, and I'm looking for organizers in every single state of the union for this effort. People are welcome to email me. It's my first initial and last name, sfaircloth, at gwi.net. That says in greatworksinternet.net and sfaircloth at gwi.net. And what we're looking for, I'm looking for average citizens who are willing to help. I'm looking for people with political organizing experience who are willing to help, contributors willing to help. I've put together a lot of campaigns for myself and for others, but this issue campaign has not been organized in this country yet, and the time is now.
All right, and again, it's sfaircloth@gwi.net if you want to find out more about that. Sean Faircloth, author of the book Attack of the Theocrats, How the Religious Right Harms Us All and What We Can Do About It. Thank you so much for being with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Great talking with you.
Thank you. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Congressman Sam Farr, who represents California's Central Coast.
John Stanton, Washington bureau chief for BuzzFeed, is here in studio with us for this entire hour as a friend of Bill. And another FOB, friend of Bill, joining us for this half hour. A good friend from California, representing California's 17th Congressional District. Now, think about it.
Now the 20th, Bill.
Oh, it's the 20th.
They changed the name. They changed the number.
You know what? I got to get a new producer.
Well, it's not.
He just makes these mistakes like this. Makes
shoot. No, it's on my BlackBerry, and we don't know how to change it, so it still says the same thing.
Oh, is that right? Oh, okay.
But it is the 20th.
It might also be on the website.
But that's kind of an esoteric. Nobody remembers
I'm sure
district numbers.
All right,
it's an oversight.
But think about it. It's the 20th. So we're talking, if you've ever been down that magnificent Highway 1, Santa Cruz, Monterey, Carmel, Big Sur. It's got to be the most spectacularly beautiful district of all the congressional districts in the country.
Yeah, it is. There's no doubt about it. But you know what? But we've worked really hard, and you and I met trying to preserve wonderful, beautiful lands of California. And
that coastline,
or the Coastal Act, all those things that we did as young people in this business of politics. I mean, if people ask me all the time, how come Big Sur isn't covered with houses? And I said, and it's mostly privately owned land. I said it's because we've done good planning here. We do really strong zoning and, viewshed protection and all kinds of issues that are really... I mean, what struck me about visiting the East Coast is how much sprawl is on the East Coast. Just sort of this just ugliness of just commercialism, of mile after mile was down on the Outer Banks and I was really shocked. I know there's some beautiful preserved areas, but I think California's done a much better job of protecting its coastline than most other states.
But it's not just it is the coastline, thanks to Prop 20, which you and I both worked on. But it's the coastline and the oceans too, which Congressman, you've done a lot
I've been
of
a
work
champion
on
of that. We have national ocean policy now. Essentially, the federal government's only had three major laws regarding the environment and that are national. One is clean water. Let's not, foul our waters. Clean air. Same thing. Don't foul our air. And now a clean ocean. Mm-hmm. And most of that ocean is all governed by the federal government.
And the ocean off Monterey is a
national marine sanctuary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I put all the rocks and islands along the entire California coast into a national monument, which makes them essentially wilderness protected lands. And people say, well, why did you do that? I mean, those rocks have been there for millions of years and nothing's ever happened to them. I said, well, with all this new cell tower technology. And
could you just see? Right?
And what's the artist that did the fence? Christo fences. Who knows when he wants to drape a rock or paint one or start using those rocks? They're great placement for advertising. So we did the ounce of prevention by putting them in a wilderness status.
Yeah. All right. Now I want to get the reaction of both of you to my favorite story of the day. I'm so excited about it, which is this one. Bernie Sanders has announced that he is open to a 2016 presidential run. And Bernie is saying, he's not saying he's running, but he says, here's what he says, somebody has to talk about, I care a lot about the collapse of the American middle class. I care a lot about working families. I care a lot about the enormous wealth and income disparity in our country. And he says if nobody else is out there raising these issues, he's going to do it. He'd be willing to do it. Just to have a strong liberal progressive voice in a Democratic primary in 2016, go Bernie, go, man.
So is he running as Elizabeth Warren's vice president?
Well, good question. That's the thing. He says he loves Elizabeth Warren, and if she did it, he wouldn't. But he's not sure that she's will.
She's not going to, no.
You don't think so?
No.
But, I don't think Bernie Sanders could win necessarily, although look at Bill de Blasio in New York, right?
Yeah, but Bill de Blasio didn't have a Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden standing in front of him. I mean, he had, Anthony Weiner, right?
But for somebody to be up there in those debates, raising these issues and saying, I support Social Security and we can't cut it, I support Medicare and you can't cut it, I think it would be great.
I think you'll see that. That candidate will be there, but I don't think that candidate, I think Hillary's popularity and the investment that she's made in politics and her family's made, I think carries the day. I think carries the election. I think she'll be the next, if she runs, she'll be the next president.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's the prohibitive favorite for the Democratic side right now. Although, I mean, her husband was not someone that anyone was thinking was going to be the president, 3 years out, except for maybe Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, So who knows? There could be a person that sort of comes out of nowhere, or then takes it. But at least right now, certainly, I think she's.
Bill, I think the reason is that the right has moved so far to the right that the left is a little bit been moved more to the middle. I mean, really do think. I don't think that the liberals in Congress, and I consider myself one of them, are that are that out of it or that far
wild,
out.
huh?
No,
Yeah,
I don't think so. Not as they used to be perceived, because the right has defined extremism in a different manner than it's ever been defined before.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we were talking before you went on the air about the approval ratings of the president. The Washington Post article this morning about the lowest point ever because of the health care.
Just for our listeners, right? The latest Post poll reflecting the problems with the launch of the Affordable Care Act, which we have waited this hour for you to come in, Congressman, to talk about this. But it shows the president at the lowest ever, which is 42%, which is roughly where George Bush was, I think, at this time, maybe. But I think
what
does that mean? Does it
I
make
think
you
the
nervous
reason
to be an Obamacare supporter?
I think this act of providing comprehensive health care, which was really done more than the need to pick up all these uninsured people, which was an embarrassment to an industrialized country like America. But it was the bottom line was essentially a financial one, that this increase in health care costs was driving everybody, the government, the military, the private sector. There wasn't anybody happy with the direction it was going, because it was going to bankrupt us all. And it was going to consume so much of our GDP that we wouldn't be able to be competitive with industrialized nations that have gone out and solved this problem. So it was a good thing. It's just been ruined by this incredible ability to do this kind of hate campaign. And, I know people react to it, but if you look at the people that are being able to get insurance, and most of the complaints, all this thing, were about the technical problems created by the computer, not about the underlying law itself being bad. And yes, then the insurance company's canceling. But, when you look down deep, what are they canceling? They're canceling lousy policies. They couldn't qualify. And they would cancel them anyway next year when they can't. Do you know that more than 50% of the private insurance, not group insurance, but just individual insurance, changes every single year? Every year, more than 50%. So all these people would be getting notices. They got notices now because insurance companies, along with the states that implemented these exchanges, said, well, if you're going to do it, let's get everybody off to the right start. Let's do it now rather than later. The timing couldn't have been worse for trying to give the message. But I just, and it may be success. Maybe the politics changes on it. But I think that the negative media has been able to be so much more effective than the positive media.
Well, I think I think also the White House, it seems to me, has done sort of a poor job of its own messaging on it also, though. I think, the idea that they, instead of trying to play this almost as sort of the traditional Puritan work ethic sort of notion of like, you're going to maybe end up paying a little bit more, but it's going to be better for not only you, but for the country. We're going to solve this big economic problem. And sort of laying out those kind of arguments wasn't really what they did. They sort of said, everything's going to be awesome. Everything is going to be great. You're not even going to notice this is happening. And, we're all going to get cotton candy at the end of the day. It was sort of the way what the American people heard. And, now we're sort of getting into this process of putting it together, and they have had some very, unfortunate sort of problems with the website, which have put this big issue, in the front. And I think, this is now sort of coming back to haunt them a little bit by not sort of coming out and being like, look, you are going to end up potentially paying more, but you're going to get so much more because you're paying more, and it's going to be better, and, the broader society is going to be better. They never made those kind of arguments. And now that's coming back to haunt them because now they're trying to make that case and to say to people, well, you're going to get, things are going to be better overall, but yeah, you may have to end up paying more. We're sort of sorry we didn't quite tell you that, but we sort of meant it, and this is hurting them.
And the question is, Congressman, we'll take a quick break here and come back. Is whether Democrats are getting nervous because of the problems with the website, and even some of those who originally voted for the Affordable Care Act might now be having second thoughts. Nancy Pelosi has said Democrats need to stand tall behind the Affordable Care Act. Tell us when we come back whether you think your colleagues are going to. It's 16 minutes now before the top of the hour. Congressman Sam Farr in studio with us, as well as John Stanton from BuzzFeed. Congressman Sam Farr in studio with us, as well as John Stanton from BuzzFeed. You'll notice that the Congressman and I are looking pretty good today because you can put yours on there.
I like to feel the cool breeze of the studio.
Oh, you do? Okay. This is the Carol Press hand-woven scarf, rayon chenille. This is one that Carol gave me to wear this morning, but the Congressman's got his own. He wears that on the floor, right?
I wear it everywhere. It's the warmest thing.
Years.
You don't need a sweater with this. This really, it keeps your neck warm, and that keeps everything warm.
There you go. There's the ad for. Anyhow, you think about Christmas, Hanukkah, think about yourself or somebody you love. Go to our website, BillPressShow.com, and on the upper right-hand side, you'll see a little click for the Carol Press scarves. Follow the click. Pictures of all different colors and sizes that she's got, and you get in touch with Carol, and you're on your own.
Bill, look, they're the most comfortable scarf I've ever worn. They're essential on the East Coast here, and even in California. So they're beautiful. It's a great gift. I've been buying them for people for years.
I know you have. All right, there we go. Let's get back to the issues of the day. Thank you, Congressman, for the plug. I want to talk about immigration reform, but first, on this question, when we saw, John and I were talking about this earlier, 39 Democrats basically abandoned ship on Friday and voted for the Fred Upton bill. Does this mean Democrats are going to run, because of these problems we've been talking about, are Democrats going to run away from Obamacare? Or, as Leader Pelosi says, asks them to do, are they going to stand tall?
Well, as the vote shows, some of them are going to stand taller than others.
Yeah, you're right.
Look, everyone out for himself when it comes to elections, and that's what it is. They're going to do whatever's in the interest they think in their district. But I really think that a year from now, when everything settles down, the biggest problem this administration made, and Congress itself made, is that we forgot to tell the American people how the American healthcare system worked. Mm-hmm. We knew how it worked. We knew where it was broken. We just went out and fixed it. But, you can't lead unless people will follow, and people won't follow unless they understand. And they didn't understand the healthcare system. They didn't even know that Medicare was a federal program. They didn't know that some people had group insurance and others had, and they didn't know about pre-existing conditions, and they didn't know about all these things. So anything that didn't affect their lives, they knew nothing about how the other person was insured or not insured. So we should have done that first. And the president should have done it with a fireside chat when he first got elected. Just say, here's the system. This is why it's broken. This is what other countries have done. We're not going to do what we're going to use the private, so we're going to use the insurance system.
That's to your point, John, and that would have put everything in context.
Yeah. Create a bit more of a...
So let's talk about immigration. BuzzFeed is reporting this morning, Jeb Bush says immigration is going to pass the House next year because John Boehner is all for it. What do you think the chances are for immigration reform? And how important is it?
Well, if he's all for it, let's do it now. We got a Senate bill sitting in the House floor, and it passed the Senate 68-32, bipartisan support. He and Speaker Boehner and Chairman Goodlatte have said that they do not want a plan to bring a big comprehensive bill to the floor this year. Why not? It's ready. We're ready. We have the votes. We could pass it. In fact, you know how important it is, Bill? This is in California. This is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. This is bigger than the farm bill, bigger than the health care bill, bigger than everything, because we have so many people affected by it. And you have all this workforce, what is doing good work, and kids in school really doing well in school, and all of them illegal, undocumented. And legitimize some of that, as we've been doing piecemeal. Now you can get your driver's license, but you got to have a scarlet A on there saying that you're undocumented, but you still can drive. And so, we just got to wipe that out and figure out a way to legitimize legitimate people in the full sense of our community. And I think that the reason Bush says this, with the Bush family, to their credit, have always been for strong immigration reform. Yeah, I mean, that has been a Bush thing, but he couldn't deliver when he was president.
Nope.
And I don't know whether he can deliver in an election year, because if you can't do it now, it's going to be a lot harder next year.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's the biggest problem, is that next year, just that there may be a month where there might be an ability to do something, but even if the House passes a bill, if they don't want to do a comprehensive bill, as the Congressman says, I don't see how you get something to the Senate at that point.
Well, Congressman, the business community for the most part supports this. The president's had leaders of the business community, and a lot of pragmatic Republicans understand what's going on with the party and say, when we only get 27% of the Latino vote for Mitt Romney, we got a problem. So what's preventing it? What's the opposition to it?
Well, I think
where's it coming from?
I think, as we've seen with the health care bill and the negative spin that's been, which I really place the responsibility on the Tea Party and the Koch brothers, who, the Tea Party would be nothing without all the money that's behind them and the ability to get their voice out there. And it's been a very negative voice. And their voice is very negative on the immigration reform. And they've been effective being loud and being visible, but they have not been effective at the ballot box, at least, in the West. There are other states where you've had primaries that they've challenged. But so that's the fear that's in the Republican Party. But you've got, courageous people like Jeff Denham, a Republican from California, who's come out and endorsed the Democratic plan and a comprehensive plan. And I talked to him last night about, can't we get something to the floor? And he said, I've got a lot of colleagues who support this. He said they just won't come out publicly and do it yet.
So if Speaker Boehner would schedule a vote on the Senate bill in the House today,
it'd pass overwhelmingly.
Yeah,
you agree?
I agree.
There you go. Well, you're right. Then let's just do it. Okay, Congressman Sam Farr, out of time. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me wear my scarf.
Representing the 20th Congressional District in California.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Robert Paarlberg, Sean Faircloth, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to